We're with Brianna Odom today, who is Senior Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at one of my favorite companies, which is Rubrik. So, Brianna, can you tell us a little bit about what you do for your role?
Yeah, absolutely. So I lead our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, action, and efforts at Rubrik. That includes putting a DEI lens on essentially the way that we do business, looking at all of the systems and processes that currently exist, and making sure that we are considering the diverse populations that are present in every single way possible. As well as working to expand the diversity that we have present. I'm sure you know, underrepresented communities in tech are a major population that a lot of organizations are trying to figure out how to close the gap on, and we're no different. So just making sure that we are attracting the best, most diverse talent and that they have good experiences once they get here and are able to really be their true and authentic selves.
That's awesome. How did you decide on this role?
Yeah, fun story actually. So in undergrad, I was a psychology major. I went to Cal State Long Beach, and I chose psychology because I knew I wanted to work with people. I knew I wanted to work in business, but I did not like math and I didn't like numbers, and accounting was a major hurdle for our business school at that campus. And so I chose to focus on psychology. And in my undergrad, I think it was about senior year, had an opportunity to take a diversity in the workplace course. And just the amount of energy that I felt in that course, looking at solutions to problems that I knew existed because I was already encountering them in internships and in jobs that I had worked, but didn't realize there was a career path to fix. Really invigorated me. It gave me direction. And the minute I took that class, I knew this was what I wanted to do. I'm sure we'll get into career path a little bit later. It took me some time to get into it full time, but I was certain that that was what I wanted to do the minute I got into that course.
That's fantastic. It's neat when your journey goes in a different direction and you kind of feel that fulfillment, right? Of this is where I should be. This is what feels right.
Yeah, it was so affirming.
That's great. So what matters to you most when you're thinking about a role?
Yeah, when I think about a role, I think about marrying the things that I'm most passionate about with what I'll need to do day to day. I feel like as individuals living in the US in particular, a lot of our identity is tied to the work that we do. And so I didn't want my work identity to be separate from who I felt like I was as a person. So the ability to kind of marry the things that I love, just doing in my day to day interaction, working closely with people, understanding people's backgrounds and experiences, providing opportunity, creating space, closing gaps. Those are things that I like to do in my personal life, and they're things that I get to do at work. I always hear that saying, it's like, if you find yourself in a position that you would do for free, then you've really made it. And I really feel like that's essentially what this was. So I just wanted to make sure that I was doing something that fed my passions and that challenged me. A lot of the conversations we have to have in the diversity, equity, and inclusion field, no matter what industry you're a part of, are extremely difficult. They require a lot of thought. They require a lot of consideration for different perspectives and where people are, and kind of meeting people on their levels. And so it allowed me to tune into that, like psychology, the way the mind thinks, the way that people receive and perceive, with actually affecting change within an organization.
That's pretty cool. I mean, when you think about the amount of thought that goes into it, you have to have that forward thinking, but also being respectful and trying to make sure that you're including everyone at the table because all of their opinions matter. And trying to take that all into consideration is also a balance, right? Within yourself and with other people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's also recognizing that different people are at different parts of the journey. And it's how do you turn even the most resistant and challenging personality into an ally, into an advocate for change. And that's a problem I always love solving. It's something that's really fun. In this field, I can say even the most resistant to change and sometimes oblivious to the experiences of those around them still end up being some of my favorite people, because once you're able to get through on a level that resonates with them, like the person that blossoms is just really amazing. So absolutely.
That is awesome. It sounds like you enjoy that in your career.
Yeah. Yeah. It's my favorite challenge to
I
solve.
like the challenge. I love that. I love that. So what did you always want to do, this when you graduated from school? Tell me about the journey from school to here.
Yes, so it was quite the journey. So what I did was in college, after I took that course, I decided, okay, I'm going to apply to a master's program because I needed to look into like, how do you actually get into this work? What are the typical requirements to do this? And a lot of the jobs I was seeing at the time were requiring advanced level degrees, whether it was master's or doctorates in change and organizational management. So I decided to go back to school for industrial organizational psychology. And did that actually while I was working in talent acquisition internship. I was able to help diversify the people we were bringing in. It was a heavily referral-based company. And as you know, if you have a certain employee base, that just only perpetuates not having diversity. So getting to practice essentially what I was focused on in school, while at the same time doing it in my corporate role, diversifying our talent pools, working with universities, sourcing diverse talent, really kind of helped me shape my career and really helped me start to provide opportunities for people in the way that I was hoping to. Fast forward 2 years, I finished the master's program and then ended up getting into talent acquisition full time, and used a lot of what I had learned as a diversity sourcer to get great at that and to embed it into my practice as a recruiter, bringing people into the organization, but I wasn't doing it full time, right? So TA was my main job, and diversity should always be a huge aspect of what you're looking for anytime you're considering talent, but I wasn't getting to shape their experiences. I wasn't getting to honor the commitment and the promise that I was making to them on the front end. Me being a Black woman, you see me as a recruiter, I'm talking to you about opportunities, you assume that there are plenty more of me at the company. And you find like, okay, yeah, we'll have some diversity. I'm going to be able to show up as me. And unfortunately, that wasn't necessarily the case. They were oftentimes joining teams where they were maybe one of two. And so I wanted to shift from bringing talent in to figuring out why talent wasn't staying. And so that's how I ended up switching over into a diversity program manager role. And that really gave me an opportunity to start to understand strategy, understand program implementation, figure out how to make DEI efforts a part of the way that the organization was functioning, and just a constant consideration, whether it was company meetings, different events we were doing, different programs we were deciding to roll out, whether they were DEI focused or not. And then from there, I got promoted to a manager role. That was a really interesting time. At the time that I got promoted to the manager role, it was the middle of COVID-19. George Floyd had just been killed. Brianna Taylor had just been murdered as well. And the entire nation was in an uproar, and it was a 10,000 person company, and nobody knew what to say. And nobody knew how to start the conversation. Luckily, they had really strong relationships in place. So it really just became, hey, this is just another aspect of that person that you honor and love and respect so much, the life that they've been living that you didn't know anything about. And so let's dig into that. Let's show that you care, and let's have the conversations that matter during this really difficult time when people were feeling a ton of stress and a lot of fear and uncertainty. And then from there, I knew that I wanted to elevate to a bit of a higher level role. I wanted to be with an organization where there were more resources allocated to the diversity and inclusion efforts, and where they were just a little bit more willing to have some progressive conversations. Because the fact that in this work, I had to potentially show up to work and have the conversation around like, hey, are we going to say anything as a company? Being a Black woman, being someone who was going through all of those same things at the same time that everyone was that I was coaching, not only was it taxing, but for me, it was like, hey, if we're not going to say anything, I can't do this work here. It shouldn't even be a debate. And so it was in that moment I knew I wanted to be somewhere a little bit more progressive, just a little bit more further along in the journey, who was willing to take a stance in difficult times and with difficult matters. And then I found Rubrik. And so when I came over to Rubrik, I elevated to a senior manager role, and I've been leading the efforts here with the help of some really phenomenal people ever since. So it was about a 10-year journey for me. It took me some time to get here. I obviously found ways to embed what I love into what I was doing, whether it was a part of the job description or not. I just made it a part of the job description. And that actually helped me get the long-term full-time roles that I was able to land into now. So it was really helpful.
It's so neat. What a great journey. What a great journey. That's awesome. And I love how, how you took a look at yourself too, and how you really wanted to be something else, that you wanted to move forward, that you wanted to develop your skills, you wanted to have realistic conversations. And I love when you said that, I wanted to feel that the company was willing to have those conversations. And I think that's a really big thing. We talk about this. I talk about company culture all the time when I'm talking about things and how important it is. And it really needs to become ingrained so much that we used to call it, it's part of your ethos. It's part of who you are as a company and as an individual, and they gel, they're together, but it's also dynamic, and it does have diversity, and all of those opinions matter, and they all come to the table, and that's really what makes it what it needs to be. So it's interesting that you brought that up, in the fact that you really wanted that kind of conversation, that kind of culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the sooner organizations realize that that is what this generation is looking for in order for them to consider a company a career home for them, the better off we'll be. Because we're not just looking for places where we can show up and make money anymore. We want organizations that are standing on strong values and principles and showing up for the communities that they exist in. And so I think that there are a lot of different ways that companies can demonstrate that, but it was big for me. It was the difference between me being able to show up and tell you how I was really doing over the weekend, or just saying it was great. So,
especially at that time, it's definitely, when you think back on, just if you took, kind of COVID even out of it, that still was a time where of difference and diversity and hard conversations. And then you add a pandemic on top of it, where you really don't have that exposure to have the conversations and do all of that stuff, because everybody was still siloed, so it's definitely, I kudos to you for overcoming the obstacles, truly.
Yeah, there's some interesting things that came out of COVID-19, obviously a ton of tragedy, but it did level the playing field for a lot of us during that time, because now we were all virtual, now we were all on a screen, and now we all had the opportunity to connect in intentional ways. It wasn't just happening like passing in the hallway. So conversations needed to be scheduled, they needed to have agendas, they needed to have guidelines and principles for respect, especially when we were discussing things as difficult as justice, right? And racial injustice in the country, as well as just the uneven distribution of work throughout COVID that was falling on women in the industries that they were working in. So a lot of our conversations were extremely intentional. I think it forced us to tap into a different level of empathy than anyone needed at work previously. And I think it did bring a lot of the people at that organization a lot closer during that time, and taught a lot of leaders a lot of really necessary skills.
Absolutely. I agree with you completely. It definitely, especially had us to become reflective and say, how do I be a better leader? How do I do this? Because this is a challenge to me as a leader, is to lead now without a team in place, and with all of the situations going on, and trying to be respectful of everything.
Exactly.
So when you think about your career and, kind of where you're at, I mean, you definitely had your own roadmap in your head and that you were following it. But what obstacles do you think you faced?
I think it's the traditional obstacles, right? Of imposter syndrome and do I belong in this room, especially with diversity, equity, and inclusion work. A lot of times when you're a DEI practitioner and you're moving into a new organization, or you're supporting an organization as a consultant, you are the expert on staff. Doesn't matter what your level is, you are the expert on staff for that organization to support them through all things DEI. You end up being kind of the lens through which they run even the simplest of conversations and questions through. And I think that sometimes imposter syndrome gets in the way when it's like you have a VP, or you have an executive staff member coming to you, even a president coming to you and saying, what do you think of this? And it's like, why are you asking me? And then you remember, and it's like, oh, I know why you're asking me. And actually, I do have a really good thought for you here. So overcoming that imposter syndrome was definitely something that I needed to work on for myself, being willing to step into the limelight, to shine, to take credit. I think as women, we don't do that very often. We often default to the we, the group, the team. It wasn't me, it was them. And I think we need to learn to just take credit a little bit more. So that was really helpful. And then, of course, it was just in this industry, I feel like the people you encounter who are doing the work are extremely helpful. They're willing to be mentors. I have mentors that I've met along the way that have been extremely critical to my success. But because a lot of times at companies, the teams for DEI work are really small, it's hard to get that development. It can be hard to have someone that you can learn from in your day-to-day about how to be better. And luckily, I've partnered with some really awesome DEI practitioners, but it's always been kind of like reaching out outside of the role to get that development and to get that help. So I would say those are some of the key challenges in this work. And then personal challenges career-wise, my transition over to Rubrik was kind of on principle. I felt like I needed to take a stance from the organization that I chose to leave. Unfortunately, there were just some things that were happening that made me feel like I couldn't do that work because I wasn't being supported in the proper ways as a woman employee, as a Black employee, as someone who was showing up and trying to do her best and advocate for all these other groups, but could not get what I was advocating for myself. And so many conversations, right? You should never surprise your boss when you choose to leave, especially not after 10 years. Right. But ultimately, I decided to leave for an organization that I felt saw my value, and for an organization that I felt was going to give me the support to make change. And so, I mean, that in itself was really hard, separating yourself from somewhere and from a lot of people that you've spent time cultivating relationships with is a big challenge. But I do want to say, like, for women who are considering a change, or if ever you're feeling like you're being second guessed or just not valued in the positions that you're in, there's always an opportunity for you to take charge of your life and get to an environment where you are, because we have that power. And so as long as we're willing to advocate for ourselves, whether that's in the organizations that we're at, and sometimes they're willing to make change quicker, and hopefully that is the case. If they're not, there is a company who will see your value. And I just urge us to always take the steps that are necessary for our own satisfaction, and to make sure that we're getting what we need out of our careers.
It's interesting because, you know, when women, sometimes when I was earlier in my career, someone said to me that when women speak of their accomplishments, it comes across as self-praise. When men speak of their accomplishments, it comes off as confidence, and it comes off as, you know, really having that complete resume. So it's very interesting to see how that has evolved, especially with women with COVID, and how, like you said, we were playing so many roles. And, you know, I think it's done a great thing for women in general to see what COVID really did do. So
I agree. And that realization too allows us to lift each other up. So it's like now I see more often than not, whether it's a male ally who's a leader or another woman who sees it happening, they're like, no, we're not going to do that. You're getting all the credit. Like, let's stop and rephrase exactly what you just said, to really highlight everything you brought to the table just now. And it's really beautiful to see people being urged to really promote themselves a little bit more, and kind of getting rid of that stigma around taking credit for what we do.
Absolutely. It's a well-deserved pat on the back, you know, that we're taking and saying, giving ourselves that virtual high five that, you know, we've done what we you know, set out to accomplish, you know. Exactly. So when we look at things, I know you and I look at things together, you know, we look at women as being in technology, as being a small pool. Within your industry, obviously in tech, it is a small pool at times, you know what I mean? We have made strides, and there's definitely stuff that's, you know, improving in the industry. There are more women. However, what do you think about in your industry and women in general?
Yeah, so small but mighty population, right? So oftentimes the women that you find in the tech industry, while there are few on their teams, depending on what teams you're looking at, of course, HR and people teams, marketing and product teams, they do tend to often still be able to find a lot of women that are extremely talented and almost sometimes are heavy on women in those populations. When you look at engineering, when you look at sales, there is still that scarcity there. But the power in that is the women who are selected for those roles have often been outperforming and over exceeding the goals that were set for them for however long they've been in their roles. They couldn't just show up to work and be absolutely average. They had to come in and they had to be exceptional. And so I think that that's what makes it so that we have, as women in tech, more power now, I would say. You start to see more women being promoted into management levels because they're realizing the value of empathetic and inclusive leadership. You start to see more women being rewarded with different equity options and things like that, recognizing there's also an equity gap in tech, not just a pay gap, but also an equity gap. So looking at just the resumes and the phenomenal like bios and accomplishments of the women that you typically come across, I think there's a different level of respect for the ones that we do encounter. Of course, there's always a desire to want to diversify teams and continue to add more women, but just recognizing like, we know what you had to do to get here. I think that that gives the women who have made it a little bit more power. And I think that they're extremely respected in the roles that they're in.
That's great. I love that, and I know a lot of women in the Rubrik.
You know how they're exceptional.
they are a force. Let me tell you that.
Absolutely.
So no, that's great. That's great. So, what would you tell your younger self, Brianna?
Don't play small. I would definitely tell my younger self not to play small in any aspect of life. I think that women, again, like we play a lot of roles, and a lot of times we are asked to take the back seat, do what's best for the team, put your family first, whatever it is. There's a lot of different tugs at us that sometimes require us to play smaller than our full potential. And I did that for a while, and it never served me or anyone around me. And I think that just realizing the sooner you step into all that you have to bring to the table, not just you will benefit, like not only will it fill your cup, but there are so many who will be inspired and who will be motivated, and that you'll be able to touch because you're truly living in your purpose and your passion. So I would definitely say that whether that's personal relationships with friends, surround yourself with friends who are proud of you and who up you to the highest levels, and who are constantly reminding you of how wonderful you are. Like my friend group has been extremely instrumental in that. Don't play small in romantic relationships. If you can't handle the personality that you bring, the power and the presence that you bring, then, it's not the right person for you. Same for work, right? Like if you're on teams that don't allow you to fully maximize all that you have to offer, you're not developing yourself. And that's only a detriment to you. So it would definitely just be, don't play small. I think that there's so much that we have, and like the sooner we step into all that we are, the better off we and the world around us will be.
Absolutely. So what would you have for advice for girls today if they wanted to follow in your shoes?
Let's see. That's a great question. I would say, one, figure out what it is that you love, right? I talked a lot about doing only the things that I love. I think that may be the zodiac sign. I'm a Libra, so we're all about like wonderful experiences, pleasure, things like that. And work was no different for me. So figure out what it is that you love, and then figure out a plan for pursuing that. I'm also a very logical person, so I don't expect anything to just come to me. I know I need to work for it. I know that there are steps that need to be taken. And I believe in tapping into the relationships around me to figure out what those steps are. So very quickly, it was, let me figure out, who this person is, how they did it, and how I can do it as well. Because there's no use in us reinventing the wheel. And a lot of times I find that our connections will help us get further. So If you are a young person in college, I would highly recommend tapping into as many organizations in college as possible, frequenting the career fairs for fun. I used to do them because I was a recruiting intern, but just realizing how many relationships with potential companies that had the power to give you, launch pad opportunities right after school was huge. So frequent career fairs. Build a strong network of friends, because those friends can get you into companies moving forward. Obviously have integrity in all of your interactions, because your character will always speak first. And what people say about you when you're not in the room has the power to either get you an opportunity or close you out of one. So I would definitely say that. And then I would say take as many learning opportunities as possible. Like in tech, there's so much now. There's coding boot camps. There's all of these different learning tracks. There's apprenticeships. There's internships. And organizations are looking for women like us who would like to enter into technology and into any of the STEM fields. Honestly, there's so many organizations who exist to help kind of close that gap. So I would say do that. Other things for the younger generation, I think that this generation definitely has access to a lot, a ton of things online at your fingertips in your phone. Never undervalue the power of real world experiences. So rather than seeing the locations on your TikTok or on your Instagram, go. There's so much experience and perspective that comes from going to different parts of the world, interacting with different cultures of people. And I would highly recommend doing that. It's probably like my biggest regret is that I didn't study abroad in college. But I'm making up for it now, traveling a ton. But the experience that you get with that is wonderful. And you get perspective about different world problems that you could potentially help your company solve. So I'd say all of those things if they were looking for advice. The power of good mentors is also another piece of advice I would have for them too. My mentors have helped keep me grounded, have pushed me to next levels and new heights, and have, been a frequent source of potential opportunities. So I would highly recommend that too.
That's great. That was awesome. I love that advice. Solid. So if you had to pick 3 words for yourself to describe you on LinkedIn, what would they be?
I think I actually have them up there. They are diversity change champion, because that's what I push for. I'm looking to push the envelope. I'm looking to challenge the way that things have always been done, that have not let historically underrepresented groups into the conversation. And I'm looking to bring other people to my side and turn them into change agents as well, because I really believe that that's the only way we're going to get this work done. So I would definitely say diversity change champion for sure.
Thanks, Brianna. Thank you very much for sharing your story. Your willingness and your courage and your honesty is truly, truly appreciated. We enjoyed having you on Her Incredible Mind.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And if anyone's ever looking for advice or for assistance, they can absolutely reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love talking to the up and coming generation and just helping people get to where they're going. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.